The deer didn't know it was about to die, but Sage did. She could feel it, a deep hum in her bones, a quiet song her instincts sang just for her. Her worn leather boots made no sound on the damp earth, and every muscle in her body was coiled tight, ready. The wind was her friend today, carrying her scent away from the unsuspecting animal. Just a little closer, a few more feet, and she would have food for the next few days. Her stomach rumbled in anticipation. It had been too long since her last real meal. But then, the wind shifted, and it brought a new scent with it. Something wrong. Something rotten and sour that made the hair on her arms stand up. It was the smell of rage, of mangy fur and bloodlust. Rogues. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the sudden heavy silence. The deer, smelling it too, bolted in a flash of white tail. Gone. Her dinner was gone. And just like that, everything changed. The hunter became the hunted. She didn't know what scared her more, the hunger clawing at her belly or the chilling certainty that she was no longer alone. Without thinking, her body moved on instinct. She scrambled up the rough bark of an ancient oak, her fingers digging into the wood. Her breath came in ragged, shallow gasps. Below, 3 massive wolves slunk out of the undergrowth. Their fur was matted, their eyes glowing with a sick yellow light. They weren't pack. They had no laws, no honor. They were killers. They circled the base of the tree, snarling, their sharp teeth dripping with saliva. One of them lunged, snapping its jaws just inches from her dangling foot. A scream tore from her throat. She was trapped, utterly, completely trapped. This was it. This was how she would die. Alone in the woods, ripped apart by monsters. Without warning, a blur of black fur exploded from the trees. It was a wolf, but a wolf unlike any she had ever seen. He was huge, a shadow brought to life, his fur the color of a moonless night. He moved with a terrifying grace, a whirlwind of claws and teeth. The rogues didn't stand a chance. He was on them in a heartbeat, a force of nature, a living storm of righteous fury. The fight was brutal, bloody, and blessedly short. In the quiet that followed, the massive black wolf stood over the bodies of his enemies, his chest heaving. He turned his head, and his eyes, molten gold and impossibly intelligent, locked onto hers. Her breath caught. In that moment, she felt it, clear as day. A pull, a recognition that made no sense, as if her very soul was reaching for him. The great wolf held her gaze for a long moment before he turned and disappeared behind a thicket of trees. Sage stayed frozen, her heart pounding. Moments later, a man stepped out from the same spot. He was tall, impossibly tall, with broad shoulders that strained the fabric of his simple black shirt. His hair was as dark as his wolf's fur, and his eyes, they were the same. The same burning, intelligent gold. He was the most powerful man she had ever seen, and he radiated an aura of absolute authority. An alpha. There was no doubt. "Come down," he commanded. His voice was deep, a low rumble that vibrated through the air and straight into her bones. Her limbs trembled as she slowly, carefully, climbed down from the tree. She landed softly on the ground, her eyes wide as she stared up at him. He was even more intimidating up close. He took a step toward her, his gaze sweeping over her torn clothes and thin frame. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his tone clipped. All business. She shook her head, unable to find her voice. No. He reached out, his hand moving to steady her as she stumbled on a root. The moment his fingers brushed against the skin of her arm, it happened. A jolt. A white-hot shock of pure energy arced between them, so powerful it made her gasp. Her world tilted. It was like lightning and honey, fire and peace, all at once. A million tiny bells rang in her soul, singing a single impossible word. Mate. But then, he snatched his hand back as if he'd been burned. His jaw clenched, and a mask of cold fury slammed down over his features. The warmth vanished, replaced by an icy wall. "What are you doing on my land?" he demanded, his voice now a low, dangerous growl. The sudden shift gave her whiplash. The connection was gone. Or he was pretending it was gone. I was hunting, she stammered, her voice trembling. I didn't realize I'd crossed the border. You're a lone wolf, he stated. It wasn't a question. No pack, no alpha, no protection. I can take care of myself, she said, lifting her chin, a spark of defiance cutting through her fear. A humorless smile touched his lips. Is that what you were doing when I found you? Taking care of yourself? Her face burned with shame. Deep down, she knew the truth. She had been seconds from death. He had saved her life. And for one insane, breathtaking moment, she had felt a connection to him that she had never felt with anyone. A connection he was now trying very, very hard to deny. You will come with me, he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. The pack will decide what to do with you. Without another word, he turned and started walking, expecting her to follow. And she did. As if pulled by a string, she followed the man who had saved her life and rejected her soul in the span of a single breath. The pack house was not a house, it was a fortress, a massive lodge built of dark wood and stone that seemed to rise from the earth itself. The air inside hummed with life, thick with the sense of dozens of wolves, cooking food, and old magic. Everyone stopped to stare as she walked in behind the alpha. Their eyes followed her, a mix of curiosity and suspicion. She felt small, like a mouse in a den of lions. A woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and hair the color of fire stepped forward. Noah, she said, her voice calm and steady. What is this? A stray, Joan. The alpha, Noah, replied, his voice flat. Found her on the northern border. Rogues had her treed. Joan's eyes met Sage's, and for a moment, Sage saw a flicker of something that wasn't hostility. Maybe pity? She's just a girl. She's a trespasser, a silky voice cut in. A stunningly beautiful woman emerged from the crowd. She was tall and graceful, with long blonde hair and eyes the color of a winter sky. She moved with the confidence of a queen and draped herself over Noah's arm as if she belonged there. And she smells of desperation. We should have gotten rid of her. That's enough, Lyra, Noah said, but he didn't push her away. Lyra's cold eyes raked over Sage, a cruel smirk playing on her perfect lips. What? I'm just saying what everyone is thinking. We have enough mouths to feed without taking in every pathetic orphan who stumbles onto our land. The word orphan was a slap in the face. It was meant to hurt, and it did. Sage flinched, wrapping her arms around herself. She wanted to run, to disappear back into the woods where she belonged. But Noah's golden eyes were on her, watching, waiting. So she stood her ground, even as her insides turned to ice. The Pack Council, a group of stern-faced older wolves, decided her fate. She could stay, for now, on probation. She would work in the kitchens, earn her keep, and prove she wasn't a threat. It was a small mercy, but it felt like a life sentence. As a young pack member led her away toward the kitchens, she risked one last glance back. Noah was watching her, his expression a storm of conflict. But then, Lyra whispered something in his ear, and he turned away. He turned his back on her, and just like that, everything changed. She wasn't just a lone wolf anymore. She was a prisoner in the home of her fated mate, a mate who refused to acknowledge her, who stood by and let his chosen female insult her. And as Lyra shot her a final, triumphant glare, Sage knew one thing for sure. This wasn't a sanctuary. This was a battlefield, and she had just been marked as the enemy. The kitchens were hot. A loud, bustling world of their own, filled with the clatter of pots and the sharp scent of herbs. For 2 days, Sage had thrown herself into the work, scrubbing, chopping, and trying her best to become invisible. It was easier to focus on the mountain of potatoes in front of her than the golden-eyed alpha who haunted her thoughts. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't forget the shock of his touch, or the sting of his rejection. He avoided her completely. If they passed in a hallway, his eyes would slide right over her as if she were nothing more than a ghost. Maybe it was fate, or maybe she was just clumsy from exhaustion, but the knife slipped. A sharp, searing pain shot up her arm. She gasped, dropping the blade with a clatter. Blood, dark and red, welled from a deep gash in the palm of her hand. It dripped onto the stone floor. 1 drop, 2. Before she could even move to grab a cloth, the kitchen doors burst open with a resounding bang. It was Noah. His eyes were wild, blazing with a primal fire she had only seen once before, in his wolf. His chest was heaving, and his gaze was locked on her hand, on her blood. The entire kitchen fell silent. The air thickened, crackling with a sudden, dangerous energy. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, his movements predatory and impossibly fast. Without a word, he grabbed her wrist. His touch was electric, 1,000 times more intense than before. Fire bloomed beneath her skin. The bond, the one he had so fiercely denied, slammed into her, a tidal wave of raw possession and desperate concern. It was so powerful it made her knees weak. He lifted her bleeding hand, his thumb stroking gently over her palm, and for a heart-stopping second, she thought he might lower his head, that he might lick the wound clean. The thought sent a shiver of pure, unadulterated desire through her. But then, he seemed to catch himself. His jaw tightened, and the fire in his eyes was banked, smothered by a will of iron. He let go of her hand, as if it were poison, taking a step back. The wall was back up, higher and colder than ever. "Be more careful," he growled, his voice a low command that held none of the intimacy from the moment before. He turned and stormed out of the kitchen, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. Her breath caught. The space between them burned with unspoken words. Her hand tingled where he had touched it, the pain of the cut forgotten, replaced by a deep, hollow ache in her chest. He felt it. He felt everything she did, and he hated it. Moments later, Joan, the beta with the fiery hair, appeared at her side. She held out a clean cloth. "Here," she said, her voice soft. Her sharp eyes held a mixture of pity and a warning. "The alpha. He has a strong sense of duty to everyone in this pack. He doesn't like to see anyone get hurt." Sage knew it was a lie. A kind one, maybe, but a lie nonetheless. What she had seen in his eyes wasn't duty. It was possession. It was the look of a male whose mate had been injured. "Stay away from him, Sage," Joan advised, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "And for goddess' sake, stay away from Lyra. It's for the best." Joan's words were a clear warning, confirming the danger Sage already felt coiling in her gut. Life settled into a tense, fragile routine. Sage worked, she ate, she slept in a small, lonely room in the attic, and she watched. She watched Lyra hang on Noah's arm, staking her claim for the entire pack to see. She watched Noah watch her when he thought no one was looking, his golden eyes filled with a storm of conflict. And she felt the bond, a constant humming thread that connected them, a secret she was forced to share with a man who refused to speak her name. One afternoon, a commotion in the main hall drew her out of the kitchens. A new wolf had arrived. He was tall and lean, with sandy brown hair and eyes the color of a summer sky. He looked familiar, achingly familiar. And then he turned. Her world tilted, her heart stopped. No, it couldn't be. It was impossible. Ben, the man who had been her everything, the man who had sworn he loved her, who had promised her a future, a pack, a family. The man who had disappeared one day without a word, leaving her utterly alone and shattered. He was here, in Noah's pack house. He saw her at the same time. His blue eyes widened in shock, his face paling. "Sage?" he breathed, her name a ghost on his lips. Her bones remembered him. Every broken piece of her heart screamed his name. The pain of his betrayal, a wound she thought had scarred over, ripped open, raw and bleeding. Her deepest flaw, the one she fought every single day, the belief that she was unworthy, that she was disposable, roared to life, consuming her. She wanted to run, to scream, to hide. But then, a low growl rumbled through the hall, silencing everyone. Noah stepped forward, placing himself directly between Sage and Ben. His sheer size was intimidating, his presence a suffocating wave of power and fury. He didn't look at her. His burning gaze was fixed on the other man. "Ben," Noah said, his voice dangerously quiet, a promise of violence. "What are you doing here?" Ben tore his eyes away from Sage, his expression shifting to one of defiance. "It's good to see you too, brother." Brother. The word hit Sage like a physical blow. Ben was Noah's brother. The man who had abandoned her was the brother of her fated mate. The universe had a sick, cruel sense of humor. Trapped between the man who had broken her past and the man who was breaking her present, Sage felt the last of her strength crumble. This was more than she could bear. That night, Ben found her in the gardens. The moonlight painted the world in shades of silver and shadow, but it couldn't hide the torment on his face. "Sage, please," he began, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name. "Let me explain." "Explain?" Her voice trembled, a fragile thing. "Explain what, Ben? How you left without a word? How you let me think? How you let me believe?" She couldn't finish. The words were choked by a fresh wave of grief. "I did it to protect you," he insisted, taking a step closer. Before she could move, a shadow detached itself from the doorway of the pack house. Noah. He moved with a silent, deadly grace, his face carved from stone. The air crackled with his fury. "That's enough," Noah commanded, his alpha voice leaving no room for argument. He wasn't looking at Ben as a brother. He was looking at him as a threat. "This is between me and her, Noah," Ben shot back, his own anger rising. "Everything that happens on this land is my concern," Noah stated, his voice dropping even lower. He finally turned his golden eyes on Sage, but there was no warmth in them, only a cold, hard resolve. He was about to do it again. He was about to push her away. "Ben, you will leave the stray alone. She is under my protection, as is everyone in this pack. She is not your concern anymore." Stray. The word was a knife, twisting in an already gaping wound. He hadn't called her by her name. He had reduced her to a problem, a piece of property to be managed. He was doing it on purpose. In front of his brother, in front of anyone who might be watching, he was severing any perceived tie between them. He thought he was protecting her, but deep down she knew the truth. All he was doing was marking her as weak, as an outsider, as someone with no one to stand for her. Ben looked from Noah's implacable face to Sage's shattered one. The fight seemed to drain out of him, replaced by a look of profound regret. From the shadows of the porch, Sage saw a flicker of movement. It was Lyra, watching the entire exchange with a smug, triumphant smile on her face. In that moment, Sage understood. Noah's attempt to protect her had just painted a giant target on her back. He had publicly declared her as nothing, and in doing so, he had made her fair game. She was no longer just an orphan. She was a rival to be crushed. And she was utterly, completely on her own. In the wake of that night in the garden, something inside her shifted. The fear was still there, a cold snake coiling in her belly. But now it had a companion, a hard, stubborn core of defiance. Because of Noah's public dismissal, she was a target. She knew it. Lyra knew it, and the pack knew it. So be it. If she was going to be a stray, she would be a stray with teeth. To make things worse, she was reassigned from the kitchens. Joan, with a look that was half apology and half warning, told her she was now to assist in the infirmary. It was a small mercy, a quiet place away from the main hustle of the pack house, but it was also a place of vulnerability. It was Lyra's mother who ran the infirmary, a woman with the same cold, calculating eyes as her daughter. The torment started small. so small she almost thought she was imagining it. A basket of clean linens would be accidentally knocked from her hands, spilling into the mud. A poultice she'd spent an hour grinding would mysteriously disappear just before it was needed. Lyra's friends, a trio of she-wolves who moved like a pack of perfectly groomed jackals, would pass her in the halls and whisper, their voices just loud enough for her to hear. Pathetic. I don't know why the Alpha even lets a rogue mutt like her stay. She should have just let the rogues have her. Each word was a tiny, poisoned dart. She tried to ignore them, to focus on the scent of herbs and the rhythm of her work. She learned to identify the different plants used for healing: willow bark for pain, comfrey for mending bones, lavender for calming a fevered mind. She found a strange peace in the quiet, methodical work. It gave her a purpose beyond just surviving. It made her feel useful. Still, she felt their eyes on her constantly, a relentless, suffocating scrutiny. One afternoon, as she was sweeping the floor, one of Lyra's friends, a tall brunette named Cassia, deliberately kicked over a bucket of dirty water. It splashed all over Sage's worn boots and the freshly cleaned floor. "Oops," Cassia said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "How clumsy of me." Sage's wolf pressed forward, a low growl rising in her throat. Her hands clenched around the broom handle, the wood groaning under the pressure. She wanted to lunge to wipe that smug look off Cassia's face, but she didn't. Instead, she took a slow, deep breath. She met Cassia's cruel gaze and held it. "Don't worry," Sage said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I'll clean it up. I wouldn't want you to get your hands dirty." Without another word, she fetched a rag and began to mop up the mess, ignoring the snickers from the other girls. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. She would not let them chase her away. This was her life now, and she would endure. But as she cleaned, she made a silent vow. She wouldn't just endure. She would find a way to fight back. That night, she couldn't sleep. Her thoughts spun, a tangled mess of anger, hurt, and a deep, aching loneliness. The bond hummed beneath her skin, a constant reminder of the man who slept in the Alpha's chambers just one floor below. A man who was so close, and yet a universe away. As if summoned by her restless heart, she found herself in the gardens again. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and night-blooming jasmine. She was tending to a patch of wilting moonflowers when a voice startled her. "They need more water." Noah. He was standing just a few feet away, a dark silhouette against the moonlit sky. Her heart skipped. He moved closer, his presence a familiar, overwhelming force. The space between them burned. I couldn't sleep," she stammered, her hands still buried in the cool soil. "Neither could I," he admitted, his voice a low rumble. For a few moments, the silence stretched, thick with everything they couldn't say. But then, to her utter shock, the wall between them seemed to crumble. Just a little. "You have a gift," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. He gestured to the plants around her. "For making things grow." Her breath caught. It was a simple compliment, but from him, it felt like a confession. "My mother loved to garden," she found herself saying, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. She said that even in the harshest soil, something beautiful can find a way to live. He was quiet for a long time, his golden eyes studying her face in the moonlight. She was a wise woman. In that moment, he wasn't an alpha, and she wasn't a stray. They were just two lonely souls finding a moment of peace in a shared silence. He took a half step closer, and his scent, pine and wild earth and something that was just him, wrapped around her. Her wolf stirred, pressing forward, wanting to close the distance, to finally touch him without a pretense. But then, the moment was shattered. "Noah, darling, Father is looking for you." Lyra. She glided onto the patio, a vision in a silk robe, her voice a weapon cloaked in sweetness. Her eyes, however, were chips of ice as they landed on Sage. The air turned frigid. Noah's mask slammed back into place. The warmth vanished, the connection severed. "I'll be right there," he said, his voice once again the clipped, authoritative tone of the alpha. He didn't look at Sage again. He simply turned and walked away, leaving her alone in the moonlight with the ghost of a connection and the chilling reality of his choice. The next day was the pack's mandatory combat training. Sage's stomach was in knots. She was not a fighter, she was a survivor. There was a difference. Joan tried to stick by her side, but the pack's trainer, a grizzled old wolf named Marcus, had other ideas. He believed in pushing everyone to their limits, and today it seemed he had decided to push Sage right over the edge. "You'll be sparring with Lyra," Marcus announced, his voice booming across the training grounds. A collective gasp went through the trainees. Everyone knew this wasn't a drill. This was a death sentence. Lyra's smile was predatory. It was the smile of a wolf who had just cornered a rabbit. "Don't worry, Stray," Lyra purred as they faced each other in the center of the ring. "I'll try to be gentle." But she wasn't. The moment Marcus gave the signal, Lyra attacked. She moved with a vicious, deadly grace, her strikes fast and brutal. This wasn't sparring. This was an assault. Sage was immediately on the defensive, barely managing to block the flurry of kicks and punches. She was outmatched in skill, in strength, in pure, unadulterated malice. Lyra's foot swept out, knocking Sage's legs from under her. She hit the ground hard, the air knocked from her lungs. Before she could recover, Lyra was on her knee pressing down on Sage's chest, pinning her to the dirt. "You don't belong here," Lyra snarled, her face inches from Sage's, her beautiful features twisted into a mask of hatred. "He will never choose you. You are nothing." And then she twisted her arm. A sickening crack echoed through the air, followed by a bolt of pure, white-hot agony. A scream ripped from Sage's throat. Her shoulder was dislocated. "That's enough!" Joan's voice cut through the haze of pain. She was there in a flash, pulling a snarling Lyra off of Sage. Across the training ground, Sage saw him, Noah. He was frozen, his fists clenched at his sides, his face a mask of such terrifying fury that even from a distance, it made her tremble. His eyes were blazing, locked on her, and a low growl was rumbling in his chest, a sound of pure, unrestrained rage. But he didn't move. He didn't come to her. He just stood there, a statue of fury, trapped by his own laws and his own secrets. And as Joan helped her to her feet, her arm hanging uselessly at her side, Sage finally understood the terrible, terrifying truth. Noah's love wouldn't save her. His rage wouldn't protect her. In fact, it was his silence, his denial, his suffocating inaction that was going to get her killed. The infirmary was no longer safe. Noah knew it. Joan knew it. And after Lyra's mother had looked at Sage's dislocated shoulder with a cold, dismissive glance before popping it back into place with brutal, unnecessary force, Sage knew it too. The pain was a blinding flash, but the message was crystal clear. There was no corner of this pack house where Lyra's influence couldn't reach her. So, Noah acted. But not in the way her heart screamed for him to. He didn't claim her. He didn't confront Lyra. He hid her. "You'll be working in the archives," he told her the next morning, his voice clipped and devoid of emotion. He'd cornered her outside the kitchens, his large frame blocking her path. He wouldn't meet her eyes. "It's quiet there. No one will bother you." Her shoulder ached with a dull, throbbing rhythm. "You mean Lyra won't be able to get to me," she said, her voice flat. His jaw tightened. "You will be safe." "Will I?" she challenged, a sudden reckless anger surging through her. "Or will I just be a prisoner in a different room, a secret you can lock away so you don't have to deal with it?" In that moment, his control finally cracked. His golden eyes, blazing with a fury that mirrored what she'd seen on the training grounds, finally met hers. "I am trying to protect you," he growled, the sound a low, rumbling threat. The bond between them flared, hot and wild, carrying the full force of his frustration, his guilt. and his terrifying possessiveness. "Your protection feels a lot like a cage," she whispered, her voice trembling. Without another word, he turned and stalked away. The archives were in the oldest part of the pack house, a dusty, forgotten library filled with the scent of old paper and leather. It was a silent tomb of pack history. And he was right. No one bothered her. But his plan, his brilliant, cowardly plan, backfired spectacularly. Because the pack talked, they whispered. The alpha had given the little stray a new position. A position of trust. A position of favor. His attempt to hide her had only succeeded in shining a brighter spotlight on her, and with every passing day she could feel Lyra's hatred growing, festering in the shadows, waiting for its moment to strike. She was no longer just a stray. She was the alpha's pet project, and that, she knew, was far more dangerous. Days bled into a dusty routine. Sage lost herself in the pack's history, sorting through brittle scrolls and leather-bound ledgers. It was a welcome distraction. She read tales of great alphas, of fierce battles, of mates who had fought and died for each other, stories that felt like they belonged to a different world. One afternoon, she found a section of records detailing rogue attacks from the last decade. Her fingers traced the elegant script, her eyes scanning the dates. And then she saw it. A report from 5 years ago. An attack on a small, unaffiliated pack on the western border. Her pack. Her breath caught. Her heart hammered against her ribs. With trembling hands, she read the details. A brutal, targeted assault. The alpha and his Luna, her parents, then killed. Most of the pack slaughtered. The attackers were described as unusually organized, led by a wolf with a distinctive silver scar across his muzzle. The report mentioned a single survivor, a young male who had escaped the massacre. The door to the archives creaked open. It was Ben. He looked tired, the shadows under his eyes a testament to sleepless nights. He saw the scroll in her hands, saw the look on her face, and the color drained from his. "Sage," he started, his voice rough. "This was them," she whispered, her voice hollow. "The rogues who killed my family." He walked closer, his blue eyes filled with a pain that mirrored her own. "Yes. The report. It says there was a survivor," she said, her gaze lifting to meet his. "A young male who escaped." Ben's shoulders slumped. The truth, heavy and suffocating, finally came tumbling out. "It was me, Sage. My father was a beta in your pack. The rogues. They weren't just raiding, they were hunting. They were hunting me." Her thoughts spun. What do you mean?" "My mother was from a rival pack," he explained, his voice cracking. "She was fated to their alpha's son, the one with the scar. But she fell in love with my father and ran away. They never forgave her. They spent years searching for her son, for me. That day, they found us." The world narrowed to the space between them. "You were there," she breathed, the pieces of her broken past clicking into place. "You were with me." "I saw them kill my parents," he choked out, tears welling in his eyes. "I saw them coming for yours. I knew they were after me, so I ran. I drew them away from the den, away from you. I thought if they got me, they would leave everyone else alone. I didn't abandon you, Sage. I was trying to save you." The air left her lungs in a rush. The story she had told herself for 5 years, the story of a girl who was so worthless, so disposable, that the boy she loved had left her without a second glance, was a lie. He hadn't left her. He had protected her. The foundation of her deepest, most painful wound crumbled to dust. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. She looked up, her eyes blurry with tears, and saw Noah standing in the doorway. He wasn't looking at Ben. He was looking at her. And the expression on his face was one of utter devastation. He had heard everything. The silence that followed Ben's confession was a living thing. It was thick with the weight of 5 years of pain, a decade of secrets, and a lifetime of regret. Noah stood frozen in the doorway, his face a mask of shock and a deep, gut-wrenching guilt. He was seeing his own actions mirrored in his brother's past. He, too, was trying to protect Sage through distance and denial. And now, he had just heard, in excruciating detail, how that same choice had shattered her. Ben, seeing his brother, straightened up, a new, defiant light in his eyes. The rivalry was still there, but it was now tempered by a shared, terrible history. "Now you know," Ben said, his voice quiet but firm. Noah didn't answer. He just looked at Sage, his golden eyes filled with 1,000 apologies he couldn't speak. The bond between them pulsed, a raw, open nerve, carrying his agony directly to her. Before the moment could break, he turned and was gone, the sound of his footsteps echoing down the long, empty hall. The game had changed. The revelation hung in the air, a truth that could no longer be ignored. Noah's guilt was a palpable force, making him even more protective, more watchful. But he still didn't claim her. The stalemate continued, but now it was charged with a new, desperate urgency. And Lyra felt it. She was a predator, and she could scent a shift in the wind. She saw the new understanding between Sage and Ben. She saw the raw guilt that haunted the Alpha's every step. She saw her carefully laid plans of a political mating begin to unravel, and her schemes escalated. The petty torments and whispers were no longer enough. A few nights later, Joan cornered Sage as she was leaving the archives. The beta's face was grim, her eyes dark with worry. "I need you to be careful, Sage," Joan said, her voice a low, urgent whisper. "More careful than you have ever been." "What is it?" Sage asked, her own fear rising to meet Joan's. "Lyra has been meeting with some of the pack enforcers, the ones who are more loyal to her father than to Noah. They're planning something, I don't know what, but it's big, and it's aimed at you." Joan's hand gripped Sage's arm, her fingers digging in. "Don't go anywhere alone. Don't eat anything you haven't seen prepared. Don't trust anyone. Do you understand me?" Sage nodded, her mouth suddenly dry. The snake of fear in her belly was back, bigger and colder than ever. The target on her back was no longer just a target. It was a bullseye. And Lyra was done playing games. She was ready to take her final shot. Joan's warning echoed in Sage's mind for days, a constant, chilling drumbeat. Don't go anywhere alone, don't trust anyone. It was good advice. It was also the advice of a prisoner. And she was done being a prisoner. The revelation about Ben hadn't just healed a wound. It had reforged something inside her. She was not a disposable thing to be abandoned or protected. She was a survivor. It was time she started acting like one. That's why she sought out Joan in the armory, the scent of polished steel and leather thick in the air. The beta was checking patrol schedules, her brow furrowed in concentration. "I want to help," Sage said, her voice clear and steady. Joan looked up, her expression surprised. "Help with what?" "The patrols," Sage said, her gaze unwavering. "You're always short on wolves for the river border. It's a dangerous route and no one wants it. I'll take it." Joan's eyes widened. "Sage, no. That's the most common place for rogue ambushes. It's the last place you should be." "And it's the last place Lyra would expect me to be," Sage countered, her voice dropping. "I can't stay locked in that library forever, Joan. I can't live my life waiting for her next attack. That's not living, it's just waiting to die. I need to do something. I need to show this pack, and myself, that I am not weak." Truth be told, she was terrified. Her heart was a frantic bird beating against the cage of her ribs. But her resolve was a stone. She had spent 5 years believing a lie that had crippled her. Now she knew the truth. She was the daughter of an alpha. She was a survivor of a massacre. She was stronger than anyone in this pack gave her credit for. Joan studied her for a long, silent moment, her sharp eyes searching Sage's face. She saw the fear there, but she also saw the iron-hard determination beneath it. She saw a she-wolf who was done being a victim. "All right," Joan said finally, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across her face. But you stick close to me. You do exactly as I say. Understood? Understood, Sage replied, a surge of adrenaline washing away some of the fear. As they prepared to leave, a shadow fell over the armory doorway. It was Ben. He had a patrol pack slung over his shoulder. The river route? He asked, his eyes finding Sage's. I'm coming with you. Before Joan could object, he looked at Sage, and his meaning was clear. He had failed to protect her once. He would not fail again. And just like that, the three of them, the beta, the ex-lover, and the stray, were a team. As they stepped out into the fading afternoon light, Sage felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. But as they walked toward the woods, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The hairs on the back of her neck prickled. Something was wrong. The forest along the river was beautiful and deadly. The sound of the rushing water was a constant roar, loud enough to cover the snap of a twig or the whisper of a threat. They moved in silence, their senses on high alert. Ben took the lead, his body tense, while Joan guarded their flank. Sage stayed in the middle, her eyes scanning the dense undergrowth. Her instincts were screaming. The air was too still. The birds were too quiet. Without warning, they burst from the trees. Not rogues, pack wolves. 5 of them, led by Cassia, Lyra's cruel second-in-command. Their faces were twisted into vicious snarls. This was it, the ambush Joan had warned her about. Well, well, Cassia purred, circling them like a shark. Look what we have here, the Alpha's little charity case playing soldier. Back off, Cassia, Joan growled, shifting into a defensive stance. This is a direct challenge to the beta. You want to start a civil war over this girl? We're not challenging you, Joan, another wolf snarled. We're just taking out the trash. And then they attacked. It was chaos, a whirlwind of fur and claws and snapping teeth. Joan was a force of nature, a fiery whirlwind of controlled rage taking on 2 of them at once. Ben fought with a desperate, protective fury, shielding Sage with his own body. But Sage was not the same girl who had been cornered in a tree. She was not the same girl who had been brutalized on the training ground. A wild, primal fury surged through her. Lyra had tried to break her, to humiliate her, to kill her, and she was done letting her. As one of the enforcers lunged for her, a growl ripped from her own throat, a sound so feral it shocked even her. Her wolf pressed forward, and she let it happen. She dodged his attack, her body moving on pure instinct. She slammed her elbow into his side, hard, knocking the wind out of him. He stumbled back, his eyes wide with surprise. But they were outnumbered. Ben went down, a pained cry torn from his lips as a wolf sank its teeth into his leg. Joan was still fighting, but she was tiring. Cassia saw her opening. She lunged, not at Joan, not at Ben, but at Sage. Her eyes burned with a murderous light. This was the killing blow. Time stood still. Sage saw Cassia's claws extending, aimed for her throat. She saw the triumphant smirk on her face. This was the end. A roar, a sound of pure, apocalyptic rage that shook the very trees, tore through the forest. It was Noah. He exploded from the woods, a black-furred demon of vengeance. He wasn't just an alpha, he was a god of wrath. He slammed into Cassia, sending her flying through the air with a sickening crunch as she hit a tree. He didn't stop. He was on the others in a heartbeat, a blur of untamed, terrifying power. It wasn't a fight. It was a slaughter. When it was over, Noah stood in the center of the clearing, his chest heaving, his fur matted with the blood of his own pack members. The surviving enforcers whimpered on the ground, broken and defeated. He shifted, his naked skin steaming in the cool air, his golden eyes blazing with a light that was not entirely sane. His fury was a physical thing, a suffocating pressure that made it hard to breathe. But he didn't look at the wolves he had just destroyed. He looked at Sage. He took in her torn clothes, the scratch on her cheek, the defiant fire in her eyes. The bond between them roared to life, a maelstrom of his rage, his terror, and his overwhelming, suffocating love. Lyra appeared at the edge of the clearing, drawn by the sounds of the fight. She saw her defeated enforcers. She saw Noah's murderous expression, and for the first time, Sage saw a flicker of fear in her icy blue eyes. Noah's gaze snapped to her. "You," he growled, his voice a low, deadly promise. But before he could move, before he could unleash the apocalypse she so richly deserved, his father-in-law-to-be, Elder Kalen, stepped out from behind a tree, his face a mask of false concern. "Alpha," he said, his voice smooth as oil. "A simple training dispute, surely. There is no need for such brutality." It was a political trap, a checkmate. If Noah punished Lyra now, he would be seen as a tyrant, attacking the daughter of an elder over a dispute. He would lose the council's support. He was trapped. Noah's hands clenched into fists. A muscle in his jaw jumped. He was the most powerful wolf on the continent, and he was utterly powerless. He looked at Lyra, then at her father, and then back at Sage. He made his choice. "Lyra," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "You are confined to your quarters until I decide your punishment." A collective gasp went through the clearing. It was nothing. A slap on the wrist for attempted murder. Lyra's fear vanished, replaced by a triumphant smirk. She had won. But then, Joan, bleeding from a cut on her arm and leaning heavily on Ben, limped forward. She stopped directly in front of her alpha, her eyes blazing with a righteous fury that matched his own. "Are you a coward?" she spat, her voice ringing with contempt. Noah's head snapped toward her. "Beta," he warned. "No," she shouted, all respect gone, replaced by raw, unfiltered truth. "You hide her. You deny her. You stand by while your future mate tries to murder her, and you do nothing. Your fear is going to get her killed. Your secrecy is a weakness, not a strength." Joan took a step closer, her voice dropping to a fierce, trembling whisper that cut deeper than any blade. "Claim your mate, Noah, or bury her. There is no other choice." The words hung in the air, an undeniable, soul-shattering truth. Noah looked from Joan's furious face to Ben's pained one. He looked at the political trap laid by Kalen and the triumphant smirk on Lyra's face. And then, his eyes landed on Sage. He looked at her, and the whole world fell away. The fury, the politics, the fear. It all vanished. All that was left was her. In the span of a breath, a decision was made. A vow was forged in the crucible of his failure. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. She saw it in his eyes. The war was over. Tonight, he would end this. For good. The vow she saw in Noah's eyes was a silent promise that echoed louder than any shout. Tonight. The word hung in the air between them, a shield against the triumphant glare from Lyra and the political maneuvering of her father. For the first time since setting foot on this land, Sage felt the solid ground of hope beneath her feet. He was going to choose her. He was going to end this. But then, as Noah ordered the pack to assemble in the Great Hall, a new sound cut through the tense quiet of the forest. A frantic, high-pitched yipping. A pup. It was a sound of pure terror, coming from deep within the woods, from the opposite direction of the pack house. Without thinking, her body moved on instinct. While the others turned back toward the lodge, she turned toward the cry. A pup was in danger. Her wolf, the part of her that was inherently protective, surged forward. "Sage! Wait!" It was Ben's voice, but it sounded far away. She plunged into the trees, following the desperate sound. The forest grew darker, the trees thicker. The yipping grew weaker, more frantic. And then she smelled it. Smoke. A faint, acrid scent that made her nose twitch. She picked up her pace, her heart hammering against her ribs. The yipping stopped. She broke through into a small clearing and froze. There was no pup. There was only a small, enchanted lure, a carved piece of wood pulsing with a faint magical light, emitting the recorded sound of a distressed pup. It was a trap. As if on cue, The world around her erupted in flames. A wall of fire, impossibly high and roaring with a monstrous voice, shot up from the forest floor, encircling the clearing completely. The heat was a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. Lyra. This was her doing. She hadn't waited to be punished. She had escaped and set her final deadly trap. Panic, raw and suffocating, clawed at her throat. She was surrounded. There was no way out. The fire was a hungry beast, closing in, eating the trees, eating the air, eating everything. And she was right in the center of its jaws. Through the shimmering wall of heat and smoke, she saw a figure fighting its way toward her, a dark shape moving with impossible speed, ignoring the flames that licked at its heels. Noah. A desperate primal roar tore from his throat, a sound of pure, soul-shattering terror. Her name. He was coming for her. He had seen the trap, and he was coming for her anyway. Hope, fierce and wild, surged through her. He wouldn't let her die. They would get out of this. Together. He was almost to her, his face a mask of grim determination, his golden eyes locked on hers. But then, the forest screamed. A massive, ancient oak, its core hollowed out by the inferno, groaned, its roots tearing from the scorched earth. It began to fall, a burning giant crashing down right between them. "Noah, look out!" she screamed. He tried to leap back, but he wasn't fast enough. The tree slammed into the ground with the force of a thunderclap, shaking the very bones of the earth. And it pinned him. The massive burning trunk lay directly across his leg, crushing it against the ground. He threw his head back and roared, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony. Her hope turned to ash in her mouth. The world dissolved into a nightmare of fire and pain. He had come for her. He had finally, truly come for her. And now he was going to die because of it. The one person who could save her was now trapped, helpless, and burning alive. Her rescuer needed rescuing, and she was utterly, completely powerless. He looked at her, his face pale with pain, his leg trapped beneath the blazing log. He was trying to shift, to use his wolf's strength, but the weight was too much. The fire was closing in on him, the flames licking at his clothes, his skin. He looked at her, and his lips formed her name. He was trying to tell her to run, to save herself. This was it, the all is lost moment. Her world collapsed into a single horrifying point of focus. Noah, trapped and dying. The fire roared in her ears, a deafening symphony of destruction. This was her fault. Her very existence had brought this ruin upon him, upon the pack. Lyra was right. She was a curse. She sank to her knees, the heat scorching her skin, the smoke choking her. Despair, absolute and final, washed over her. This was her destiny. The core belief that had haunted her entire life, that she was destined to be left, to be abandoned, to watch everything she cared about turn to ash, was happening in the most literal and horrific way possible. All his secrecy, all his caution, had led to this. They were both going to die. And they were going to die alone, separated by a wall of fire. His pained gasps were growing weaker. The roar of the fire was fading. All she could hear was the frantic, fading beat of his heart, a desperate drum calling to hers through the bond. He was giving up, and something inside her snapped. A strange, terrifying calm washed over her despair. The fear, the pain, the grief, it all burned away, leaving behind something hard and pure. A single, unshakable thought. No. The bond between them, the connection he had fought for so long, now became her anchor. It flooded her not just with his pain, but with his strength, his love, his fierce will to live. And it awoke something inside of her, a power she never knew she possessed, a deep, dormant strength that had been sleeping in her bloodline, waiting for a moment of impossible need. She got to her feet. The flames no longer felt hot. They felt like a part of her. The roar of the fire was no longer a threat. It was a song, and she knew the words. She walked toward the burning tree, toward the man who was her mate. Her soul answered his, She placed her hands on the rough, burning bark of the massive oak. She didn't feel the heat. She didn't feel anything but the desperate pull of the bond. She took a deep breath, and she lifted. It was impossible. The massive, burning oak tree weighed more than a boulder, a solid wall of wood and fire. But the bond didn't know the meaning of impossible. It only knew mate. It only knew save him. A strength that was not her own. A raw, primal power that tasted of ancient earth and starlight surged through her veins. A guttural cry tore from her throat as every muscle in her body screamed in protest. And the tree moved. It lifted. Inch by agonizing inch, she pushed the burning giant upwards, creating just enough space. Noah, his eyes wide with a stunned, disbelieving awe, scrambled free, his injured leg dragging uselessly behind him. The moment he was clear, Sage's strength vanished. She collapsed to the scorched earth, the adrenaline fading, leaving her trembling and gasping for air. The burning tree crashed back down beside her, sending a shower of sparks into the smoky air. The fire roared around them, an unbroken circle of death. But it didn't matter anymore. He was safe. He crawled to her, ignoring the searing pain in his leg. He reached out, his hand shaking, and gently brushed a soot-stained strand of hair from her face. His touch was a reverent, wondering thing. "Sage," he breathed, his voice raw with an emotion she had never heard from him before. It was awe. It was gratitude. It was a love so profound it stole the air from her lungs. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and in his golden eyes, she saw every wall he had ever built between them crumble to dust. She was not a stray. She was not a weakness. She was the one who had saved him. "I'm sorry," he choked out. The words a confession, an apology for every moment of denial, every second of fear. "I am so sorry." "I know," she whispered, her own tears tracing clean paths through the grime on her cheeks. He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. And for a single perfect moment they were just two souls in the heart of an inferno, their bond a shield against the flames. The world could burn. As long as they were together, they would be okay. But the fire was still a very real threat. With a groan of pain, Noah pushed himself up. "We have to move, now." He scooped her into his arms as if she weighed nothing. She was so tired, her body aching from an exertion it wasn't built for. She buried her face in his chest, inhaling his scent, pine, smoke, and the unique, comforting smell of her mate. He moved with a grim, determined limp, his powerful body shielding hers from the worst of the heat as he searched for a weak point in the wall of flames. He found it. A place where an old dead tree had already fallen, creating a gap in the inferno. He didn't hesitate. He charged through the curtain of fire, a low growl rumbling in his chest, a primal sound of defiance against the very elements. They were through. They were out. The cool, clean air was a balm on her scorched skin. She expected him to take her to the infirmary. She expected him to find Joan, to get help for his mangled leg. He did neither of those things. Instead, he strode out of the burning forest and directly toward the pack house, his limp pronounced, his face set like granite. Every step was an agony. She could feel it through the bond. But his resolve was a thing of iron. He was not seeking safety. He was seeking a reckoning. The pack was gathered outside, their faces a mixture of horror at the fire and confusion at the Alpha's orders. They saw him emerge from the smoke, a wounded king carrying his prize, and a stunned silence fell over the crowd. They saw his burned clothes, his injured leg, and the soot-stained girl held tight in his arms. And they saw the look on his face. This was not the face of their cautious, controlled Alpha. This was the face of a male who had been pushed past his breaking point. He didn't stop until he had reached the great stone steps of the lodge. He gently placed her on her feet, but kept an arm wrapped firmly around her waist, holding her to his side. He was leaning on her as much for support as for a statement. "We are one." He faced his pack, his golden eyes sweeping over the crowd, missing nothing. He saw Lyra and her father, their faces pale with shock and a dawning horror. They had thought their plan had worked. They had thought Sage was dead. Noah took a deep breath, his voice ringing out over the silent crowd, imbued with all the power and authority of his alpha blood. "There has been a betrayal in this pack," he boomed, his voice echoing in the sudden, heavy silence. "An act of treason, an attempt on the life of your Luna." A collective gasp rippled through the pack. Your Luna. The words were a claim, a declaration, a war cry. "Every member of this pack will assemble in the Great Hall. Now," he commanded. "You will all bear witness." The Great Hall was suffocatingly quiet. The entire pack stood assembled, their faces a sea of confusion, fear, and anticipation. They parted like a river as Noah, still leaning on Sage, limped to the center of the room. Ben and a pale-faced Joan pushed their way to the front, their eyes filled with a fierce, protective loyalty. Sage's heart was pounding. Every eye was on her. The whispers followed them. The stray, the orphan, the homewrecker. But for the first time, the words had no power. She stood tall, her hand resting on Noah's arm, her head held high. She was not a stray. She was his, and he was hers. Lyra and Elder Kaelin stood near the front, their composure cracking. Kaelin's face was a mask of outrage, but his eyes darted around nervously. Lyra, however, looked at Sage with a hatred so pure, so venomous, it was a physical force. She had thrown her final stone, and her target was still standing. Noah brought them to a halt in the very center of the hall, directly in front of the Alpha's ceremonial seat. He didn't sit. He stood before them all, a wounded, furious Alpha with his mate at his side. The tension in the room was a tightly wound string, ready to snap. The air crackled, thick with unspoken accusations and the promise of a long-overdue judgment. He let the silence stretch, his golden eyes moving from face to face, demanding their complete and utter attention. He was the Alpha. This was his hall, and tonight, his word was law. He looked down at Sage, his gaze softening for a fraction of a second, a silent question. "Are you ready?" She gave a single, firm nod. "I am." He turned his gaze back to the pack. He looked directly at Lyra, his eyes turning to chips of ice. The final confrontation was here. The time for secrets was over. The time for truth had come. He opened his mouth to speak, and the entire world seemed to hold its breath. In the echo of his voice, Noah's gaze swept across the silent hall before landing, hard and unforgiving, on Lyra. "For weeks," he began, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that filled every corner of the room, "there has been a cancer in this pack, a poison of ambition and jealousy. It began with whispers and torment, escalated to a staged training accident, and then to a violent ambush by the river." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Tonight, it ended with a forest fire, a trap set to murder the woman who is my fated mate." A wave of shocked gasps and murmurs rippled through the pack. Mate. The word was out. A definitive, irrevocable claim. Elder Kaelin stepped forward, his face a mask of practiced outrage. "Alpha, these are monstrous accusations. My daughter is your intended. She would never—" "Your daughter," Noah cut in, his voice like cracking ice, "is a traitor and a murderer." He turned his burning gaze back to Lyra. "Deny it." Lyra, seeing her future crumbling to ash, found her voice, a voice dripping with venom. "He's lying. The stray has bewitched him. Can't you see it? He's weak, obsessed with this nothing. She set the fire herself to gain his sympathy." The accusation was so wild, so desperate, that it was almost laughable. But some in the crowd shifted, their loyalty to Kaelin making them hesitate. And just like that, Sage knew it was her turn. She let go of Noah's arm and took a single, shaky step forward. Every eye was on her. The timid, frightened orphan was gone. In her place stood a woman who had walked through fire. I was not the one who ambushed Joan and Ben by the river, she said, her voice clear and strong, ringing with a truth that was impossible to fake. I was not the one who set a magical lure to trap a pup that wasn't there, and I was not the one who stood by and watched as my alpha was crushed by a burning tree. Her gaze locked with Lyra's. That was you. Lies, Lyra shrieked. You have no proof. But I do. The voice came from the side of the room. Ben stepped forward, his leg bandaged, his face grim. Every head turned to him. The alpha's estranged brother. The pack held its breath. I followed Noah into the woods, Ben said, his voice resonating with authority. I saw him charge into the flames after Sage, and on my way I saw her. He pointed a single damning finger at Lyra. She was watching from the ridge, her face lit by the flames she had created. She was smiling. The tension broke. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The pack had seen the rivalry, the jealousy, they had seen Lyra's cruelty, and now they heard the testimony of two witnesses, one the victim, the other the alpha's own blood. They looked at their wounded alpha standing proudly with the she-wolf who had clearly pulled him from the fire, and they made their choice. A low growl started from the front of the crowd and spread, a rumbling wave of condemnation. The pack turned on Lyra, their eyes filled with disgust. She was no Luna. She was a monster. Kalen tried to speak, to defend her, but his words were drowned out by the rising anger of the pack. He was politically ruined. Lyra looked around, her face a mask of horrified disbelief. She had lost. Noah raised a hand, and the hall fell silent once more. Lyra of the House of Kalen, he boomed, his voice the very embodiment of law. For the crimes of treason and the attempted murder of your Luna, you are hereby stripped of your name and your pack. You are exiled. If you ever set foot on these lands again, you will be hunted down and killed. As the guards grabbed a screaming, struggling Lyra and dragged her from the hall, the pack turned as one. They looked at Sage, standing beside their alpha, and they bowed. In the quiet that followed, the great hall slowly emptied, leaving only the four of them, Noah, Sage, Joan, and Ben. The adrenaline faded, and a wave of bone-deep exhaustion washed over Sage. Your leg, she whispered, looking down at Noah's mangled limb. It will heal, he said, his voice soft, his eyes never leaving her face. Joan came forward, a real, genuine smile finally reaching her eyes. Welcome to the pack, Luna, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Sage pulled her into a hug. Thank you, Joan, for everything. Over Joan's shoulder, she met Ben's gaze. He gave her a small, sad smile. An entire history of pain and misunderstanding passed between them, and for the first time, it didn't hurt. It was just the past. He nodded once, a gesture of peace, of acceptance, before turning and helping a still-bleeding Joan toward the infirmary. And then, they were alone. The silence in the great hall was a stark contrast to the chaos from moments before. Noah gently led her to the Alpha's chambers, a room she had never seen. It was large and rustic, with a huge stone fireplace and a balcony that overlooked the moonlit forest. He sank onto the edge of the massive bed with a pained groan. Without a word, she went to the washroom and came back with a basin of warm water and clean cloths. She knelt before him, gently prying his torn trousers away from the raw, burned flesh of his leg. I was so scared, he confessed, his voice a raw whisper in the quiet room. In the fire, when I was trapped, all I could think was that I had failed you, that my fear, my stupid, ingrained belief that a mate was a weakness, that it was going to be the death of us both. She looked up from his injury, her hands stilling. I was scared too, she admitted, her voice trembling. Not of the fire, but of you leaving me. Again. He reached out, his fingers gently tracing the line of her jaw. I was a fool, Sage, a coward. I thought I was protecting you by keeping you a secret, but all I did was leave you alone and vulnerable. Can you ever forgive me? "There's nothing to forgive," she whispered, leaning into his touch. "We both had our ghosts to fight." He tended to the scratch on her cheek, his touch impossibly gentle. All the walls were gone. All the secrets were out. There was nothing left between them but the raw, undeniable truth of the bond that had refused to be denied. He had been ready to die for her. And she had found the strength of the gods to save him. Her chest ached with a love so powerful it was a physical pain. He looked at her, his golden eyes shimmering with unshed tears, and she saw her future there, a future she had never dared to dream of. "You are not a weakness, Noah," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You were never weaker with me, you were just alone. And you don't have to be anymore." He leaned in, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. But she didn't. She met him halfway. This kiss was not like the frantic, desperate moments of instinct before. This was a choice. It was slow and deep, and filled with all the words they had never been able to say. It was a promise of 1,000 sunrises, of a shared future, of a home. It was the taste of forever. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless. He rested his forehead against hers, a real, genuine smile finally gracing his lips. It transformed his face, chasing away the last of the shadows. "My Luna," he murmured, the words a reverent vow against her skin. Later they stood on the balcony, a cool night breeze washing over them. The smell of smoke still lingered in the air, a reminder of all they had survived. He stood behind her, his arms wrapped around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. His leg was bandaged, and her shoulder was sore, but they were whole. They were together. Below them, the packlands stretched out, a kingdom of shadows and moonlight. It was no longer a prison or a battlefield. It was home. "My mother used to say," she whispered into the quiet night, "that even in the harshest soil, something beautiful can find a way to live." He held her tighter. "She was right," he said, his voice a low, contented rumble against her ear. And as they stood there, two souls forged into one in the heart of a fire, Sage finally understood. True strength wasn't found in solitude or in denying your heart. It was found in the courage to fight for it. And their fight was finally over. This was just the beginning.